Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and this is your horoscope for Pisces and Pisces rising for the entire year of 2020. Joining me today is astrologer Leisa Schaim. Hey, Lisa.
Hey, Chris.
And we're going to be looking at the next 12 months and giving you an overview of the major transits and other planetary movements during the course of 2020.
Mhm.
All right, so this is the last one. We saved the best for last, of course, as always.
Yes.
And we also, even though sometimes people complain that it takes forever to get to Pisces and that comes last if you don't do it out of order, the positive side that I wanted to mention is that now we've done enough of these that we've really got it down
Mhm.
to like the most important things, and it's much more refined at this point than when we started way back at Aries.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. So you're getting kind of the best cut of all of them, I would say.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody who joined us on the live stream tonight or who has joined us in the chat. Let's jump into it.
Okay, so January.
January,
we're already into some of the thick of the important transits happening. We're recording this on January 10th, and that's actually the day of both the Cancer eclipse, the Uranus station in Taurus, and the Saturn-Pluto conjunction then will be happening in 2 days from now, January 12th. So that's quite a clustering of a bunch of important things within just a few days. Let's start with the Cancer eclipse. And so for you, with Pisces rising, that's going to be an eclipse in your 5th house, which has to do with children, sexuality, things you do for fun or entertainment or hobbies, creative expression, as well as, just going out and enjoying yourself. So this is a Cancer-Capricorn axis is where the eclipses have been happening for about a year now. So this one isn't new. It's actually the second to the last one. The last one we'll get this summer. But this is kind of a mini culmination since it is a lunar eclipse to your 5th house.
Right. So there's something that you probably started 6 months earlier when there was a solar eclipse in your 5th house, which is now coming to culmination or coming to fruition in some way, where the seeds of that may have initially been somewhat subtle in terms of starting a new thing in this area of your life, but now it's turned out to be something that's much more important than you thought at first, or at least that is devoting more of your attention and has sort of like a spotlight shown on it this month.
Mm-hmm. And oftentimes things relating to the eclipse will crop up around the time of the eclipse, but they don't have to exactly. So in other words, this is one of those 3 actually major things this month that are longer influences. It's not just like this cluster of 3 days, even though that's potentially when some of it is the most intensified. The other one is the second out of the 3, I should say, is the Uranus station in Taurus. And so Uranus has been transiting your 3rd house, which has to do with siblings, neighbors, or your immediate neighborhood, short distance travel. So basically the way you get around town, which can be your car, and communication in general can go in the 3rd house. And so Uranus transiting there, which is a 7-year-long transit approximately, brings innovation, unexpectedness, and things that, I was going to say unexpectedness, ups and downs, I would say, unevenness to this area of your life. Sometimes for some people with Uranus transiting your 3rd house, since it can sometimes involve technology, can be you're incorporating more technology into how you communicate with people. I've seen things like, starting a podcast or a blog with Uranus going through your 3rd because it's changing suddenly the way you communicate with other people, even people you don't know, potentially. I'm trying to think other things going on with Uranus through the 3rd house. Things going on with your siblings could become more unexpected. Something could be going on with regard to major change in their lives if you do have siblings or other assorted relatives there. That sort of thing.
Yeah, so Uranus can sometimes be kind of a disruptive planet. It can sometimes shake things up in your life. And that would especially be the case if you have anything around 2 degrees of Taurus, which is where Uranus is stationing, or even to a lesser extent, 2 degrees of the other fixed signs, which are 2 degrees of Leo, 2 Scorpio, or 2 Aquarius, because then Uranus would be making a hard aspect at this time to those placements, where it could be importing some sort of sense of instability or shaking things up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So while this is a longer transit, when you'll notice that the most is when it either goes over or makes hard aspects to natal placements in your chart, or when it stations, as it is here in January. It's the first of 2 stations this year in January and August. So that's when you'll notice it the most, unless it's hitting your planets directly. So.
So we'll return back to that later in the year when it makes its second station.
Yeah.
All right.
And then the third thing.
Right.
The third thing is going to be Saturn-Pluto conjunction in your 11th house, which has to do with friends, groups, the larger social sphere, networks of people that you know. And so this is a major area of concentration that's been the case for a while now for you, because with Pisces rising, Pluto entered Capricorn in 2008. So that's when it entered your house of friends and groups, kind of sort of very slowly pushing for major transformation with regard to something about that area of your life. And then Saturn joined it at the end of 2017 in December for approximately 3-year transit there. So both of those have been transiting there for a while, and this is just kind of coming to a peak now. So it's not a new thing. Whatever's coming up with regard to friends or groups for you. But with the exact conjunction in the middle of January here, something about that can come to a head. Oftentimes when those planets are transiting your 11th house, there can be a sense of either outgrowing friendships or some sort of greater distance than usual with regard or between you and some of your friends. For some other people with Pisces rising, it could have been a time where you had fewer friends, but you were concentrating more on them. Maybe one of your friends needed help in their life for some reason, or perhaps you joined a professional organization. That would be a Saturn transit through the 11th, that kind of thing. So there's different ways it can play out, but this is where if there is a major change that's been happening, particularly with regard to sort of serious reconsideration of the role of particular friends in your life or groups that you belong to, this is one of the times it'll come to a head in mid-January.
Yeah, and so that Saturn transit, which could have indicated some difficulties or in the best case scenario, some restructuring of your friendships in your life since December of 2017, one of the positive things, even though you're in the last third of that transit over the course of the next year, and it's going to be wrapping up between now and December, one of the things that's different this year is that Jupiter just a month ago ingressed into Capricorn as well, and will spend the entirety of this year moving through that sign and moving through your 11th house. So that's going to bring in a different energy that's quite opposite to Saturn, where Saturn can be more constrictive and a little bit more depressing and a little bit more isolating. Jupiter can be more expansive and more about growth and new opportunities. So this could be a year in which things are balanced out and you reach a little bit more of an equilibrium in your life when it comes to friends, and perhaps even make some new friends, or at least have some relationships be more stabilized after going through a period of testing or questioning.
Definitely. Yeah, I would agree with all of that. So there's definitely a benefit this year to Jupiter joining that Capricorn transit party as opposed to just having Saturn and Pluto there. So I was highlighting the Saturn-Pluto conjunction because that does go exact mid-month, but Jupiter certainly transiting there almost all year until mid-December of 2020 will definitely help bring new opportunities and have some more optimism and not just seriousness in that area of your life.
Right. All right. So those are the main transits, and some of these are like background transits that are going to be operating in different ways for most of the year. But I think those are the main things we needed to mention for January. Mm-hmm. So let's move on to February.
All right. So February, one of the main things is that Mars moves into Capricorn mid-month around February 16th. And so Mars is joining all of those other planets in Capricorn, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in your in your 11th house of friends and groups. And so this will definitely bring more attention. A Mars transit is usually quick, just about 6 weeks, but even though that's still true here, it's just a lot of energy going to your 11th house at this point. So, and Mars in particular, when it goes into the 11th, can bring on the one hand greater energy and greater effort towards something in that area of your life, towards something about a friendship, or putting a lot of your energy temporarily more than usual into a group endeavor or something like that, even into activism or something, because that is the larger social sphere. It's a quicker transit, but it's kind of just adding to these longer transits. So the other thing that Mars can bring when it transits the 11th is tensions with regard to friendships or even conflict with a friend.
Yeah, so especially for the people with day charts, this could be kind of a tense period for friendships that lasts for about a month. And there could be, in the worst case scenario, like a severing or separation when it comes to friendships depending on how your birth chart's set up and if it's hitting it in a certain way.
Hmm.
So the good news, though, is this transit only lasts for about a month, starting on the 16th of February and going through into the very end of March.
Hmm.
Weirdly, right around the same time that Mars ingress takes place on February 16th, Mercury stations retrograde that very same day in Pisces in your first house.
Yeah, so this will be the first of 3 Mercury retrogrades this year. We normally have 3 to 4 Mercury retrograde periods per year. And this one is a little bit more focal to you because it is happening in your first house of self. So this is probably one to pay a little more attention to than average, I would say. So Mercury going backwards through your first house can cause you to revisit, or rather can coincide with you revisiting something about your sense of self, your sense of individual identity, who you are in the world. It can also have you revisiting things like your choices in appearance, like hairstyle or clothes. That can sound a little superficial, but and this is a quick transit anyway, but those things are the external manifestation to a large extent anyway of how you feel about yourself and who you think you are. So it's not entirely superficial if you're revisiting things like that. Let's see, what other things would be a Mercury retrograde through the first?
I think just more broadly themes of finding your voice and figuring out how to communicate, and maybe revising if there's ways that you could communicate more effectively what you're trying to convey to people from your internal world to your external world. That could be a large part of this transit. Might be a little tricky because there might be some instances of like miscommunication where maybe from your end that you misunderstand something, or you mishear something from somebody else, or don't convey some message that you're attempting to convey as effectively as you could, since Mercury is stationing retrograde conjunct Neptune in Pisces in the first house. So that's one potential drawback of this Mercury retrograde transit, is it could amplify issues with miscommunication, and the miscommunication or the misunderstanding could come from you rather than from elsewhere, from somebody else. So maybe be on your guard to try to be extra explicit and extra clear in communications around this time to whatever extent that you can.
Yeah, definitely. And just to add to that, we won't be focusing too much on the Neptune transit this year because it's not largely interacting with many other planets this year in a strong way. But for you, it is pretty focal because Neptune as a long-term transit is transiting your first house of self. So when other planets do interact with that, that's going to emphasize that further for you. And with the Mercury retrograde conjunct Neptune in your first, as you said, not just taking care around potential miscommunications in one direction or another, but part of that could come from you even potentially not knowingly giving off an air of misunderstanding, simply because not just the Mercury retrograde going through the first, but the Neptune transit as a long-term transit going through your first house of self can have you having fluctuating feelings and uncertain feelings regarding your own identity, really. And so, other people could misperceive you or vice versa because your identity isn't really in a solid frame of reference right now.
Right. And one of the funny things about this transit is that since the retrograde begins the same day that Mars goes into the 11th house of friends, one thing you might want to be careful for in case those two are connected is like a miscommunication or misunderstanding that leads to a difficulty or a period of tension or even a falling out with a friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
So that retrograde period, like all retrograde periods, lasts for 3 weeks. And the halfway point when there should start to be some resolution to the issue that's set up when it begins occurs on the 25th of February when the Sun conjoins Mercury. And then early in March, Mercury actually retrogrades out of Pisces and it moves back into Aquarius into your 12th house, where it eventually stations direct on the 9th of March.
Mm-hmm. So while it's not a serious transit here, with the Mercury retrograde dipping back into your 12th house of hidden places and then stationing direct there, that could be something like some miscommunications that happen in your life you suddenly realize came from someone else communicating that you weren't aware of with regard to the issue, because the 12th house can be things that you don't see in the moment. Mm-hmm. It can also be Mercury retrograding back into the 12th can be something about you suddenly seeing something about your own motivations that you weren't clear about before, because the 12th house can also have to do with things like your subconscious or sometimes things that are kind of self-undoing.
Right. Yeah, I think especially the idea of the Mercury retrograding out of the first house and moving into the 12th house, so that you have to go back and revise something or revisit something about the 12th house may focus on ways in which you might be undermining yourself accidentally or inadvertently and forcing you to re-examine that, or even instances where you might accidentally make an enemy or create a situation where you're at odds with somebody inadvertently, so that you have to go back and revise that and see if you can smooth things over with that person.
Hmm. Yeah, I could see that.
All right. So that's the Mercury retrograde, which is wrapped up by the 9th of the month.
Hmm.
Then, for some reason, that acts as a precursor to a major set of transits that begin later in March. First, with Saturn moving into Aquarius on the 21st. And then just a week later, Mars also moves into Aquarius on the 30th of the month.
Yeah, so this area of your life, the 12th house of hidden places, is going to have a lot more activity coming up. And so the Mercury stations direct early in the month there, but then Saturn coming in late March on the 21st will last until July 1st. And that's going to be a preview of a longer transit, since most Saturn transits are 2.5 to 3 years through a sign. That's going to start in full at the end of the year in December. So this is going to be a bit of a preview of what that will be about for you. It'll just dip into the first 2 degrees of Aquarius before retrograding back to Capricorn in July. So you can pay attention at this time to see what comes up, and you'll get a better sense of the area of your life that's being activated with the next Saturn transit once it moves out of Capricorn. However, Mars also moves in there around the same time in late March. And with Mars and Saturn both going into Aquarius around the same time, that probably will bring a sense more of stress or strife or some issue that you need to deal with, rather than just attention itself. To that 12th house area. And that can be a little bit tricky because the 12th house is by its nature very indirect. You know, it's kind of like your blind spot.
Right.
And so it can be things like you were saying a moment ago about people working at cross purposes to yours, or, you know, basically people who, you know, for whatever reason don't like you or something, and having to deal with something around that. It can also be that you're entering a longer period of time where you're going to be inwardly introspective and kind of working on yourself psychologically. It can be a time where you feel like you need to withdraw more, whether that's for some particular reason, like you are sick all of a sudden and you need to rest more than usual or something like that. Or it can just be that you feel more inward and therefore you're going to be more reflective rather than social over the next few years. So this is just going to be for a few months here, but it will give you a sense of the later transit starting in December.
Yeah, definitely. And because Mars and Saturn form a conjunction really early on at the end of March in that sign, it may inaugurate this shift into activating the 12th house through some sort of obstacle or difficulty, or even potentially like a crisis or an issue that comes up at this time in your life. So this could mean, I mean, the 12th house, the 11th house traditionally deals with friends, whereas the 12th house deals with enemies or people you don't get along with. So this may be showing some long-term period of needing to restructure some of the people, the relationship you have with some of the people that you don't get along with in your life. And maybe some of those people or one of those people is being particularly like annoying or combative in a way that you have to address or deal with more head on than you're used to wanting to deal with.
For sure.
That's going to be especially the case for people with day charts as soon as Mars ingresses in. And luckily that's only going to last for about a month, because I believe it looks like Mars goes in on the 30th of March, but then it's already finished with that transit by the 13th of May. Yeah, so that's one of the main things I would mention just about that, is that it sort of starts off more difficultly, but I think you focused a lot on how once Saturn goes back later in the year, that it will go in with Jupiter at the same time.
Yeah, and that's a much nicer combination than Mars and Saturn being in there at once. And so while this will highlight come late March what that area of life will be focused on for you at that time, it's not, when it goes back later, I don't want that to scare you, because when it goes back later, it will probably be better. It will still be probably effort and attention and work you need to put into that area, but Jupiter will be there helping out alongside Saturn. So this March through July, or March through April period, will really be more of the focus of the stress around it, I would say.
Sure. All right. So that's starting at the end of March, but then really those transits are going into April. So that'll
Mm-hmm.
take us into that month.
Mm-hmm. So April, let's see, we have a Jupiter-Pluto conjunction at the beginning of the month on April 4th. Yeah, April 4th.
Mhm.
And so that is happening in Capricorn, which is your 11th house of friends and groups. And since Saturn has kind of gotten out of the way at this point, this does mean that whatever this sort of more long-term transformation you've been working on since 2008 with regard to Pluto transiting your 11th house of friends and groups has been about for you, Jupiter now comes around and touches Pluto and kind of expands opportunity to change that further, or or gives you more opportunity to grow in that area.
Yeah. So it's kind of nice that after 2 years of Saturn transits through the 11th house, in the sense of constriction and the sense of this being a period of testing for friends, or sometimes the rejection of certain friendships, that now with Saturn just moving through Aquarius, all that's left is Jupiter moving through that sign for a few months. So we get this period of like growth and expansion that gets kind of accelerated or exacerbated by the conjunction with Pluto. So you may find your social life or your work with groups expanding very rapidly all of a sudden, and that almost becoming, like in some instances, like a point of obsession or intensity for you at this time in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with Jupiter and Pluto there as well, it's not going to be true for all of you, but some people may be working on things either in the social sphere or working with friends on something, because Pluto is kind of like big energy. And so when you put Jupiter and Pluto together, for some people, that will be like a bigger than usual push towards doing something with friends. And that can be, again, activism, if that's something that's in your life, because it's the social sphere. If you're doing actual work with a group of friends, or even one or two friends, then it can be something where you're trying to expand that further at this time. And that'll be a little bit easier because it'll be just Jupiter and Pluto, like I said a moment ago, without Saturn in the mix temporarily.
Right. All right. So that actually gets intensified later in the month when Pluto stations retrograde on the 25th of April.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the last major outer planet transit during that month, which then takes us into the month of May.
Mm-hmm. So May, the major thing that's happening is Saturn is retrograding in Aquarius on May 11th. And so that just little dip into your 12th house of hidden places, there's a temporary accentuation of whatever that transit is about so far for you. Because anytime a planet stations, then it temporarily intensifies that energy, whatever that planet's energy is about. And so Saturn is always about hard work, responsibility, paying sort of serious attention to a certain area of your life, wherever it touches. And so this is just going to be a temporary little further feeling of whatever that Saturn transit through your 12th is about, but that won't last very long, because then it will pretty short order move back into Capricorn.
Yeah, and what's interesting around the time of this station, that Mars also completes its transit through Aquarius just 2 days later on the 13th of May. So it's like there's one last little push here of whatever that Saturn and Mars transit through Aquarius is about right in the middle of May, and then there's almost like an alleviation of that over the course of the next few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So Mars moves into Pisces on the 13th of May,
Mm-hmm.
and that is the first whole sign house, the place of the body as well as the mind, for those with Pisces rising.
Mm-hmm. So Mars will usually give you more energy when it moves out of a 12th house transit and into the first, because the 12th is more about kind of withdrawal, and then the first is really being out front and center. It's the house of self. So Mars moving through there can have you more energized than you were for the previous month or so. You just want to be careful to kind of use that energy responsibly, because the flip side of that can be feeling more combative or acting more aggressively than you mean to, because it's a very forthright energy. So that's just something to watch out for as it goes into your first. I mean, I would say particularly because it does, well, let's see, is Saturn still in Aquarius at this point?
Yeah.
Okay, never mind then. I was going to draw a connection there that's not quite there yet. Yeah, so I would say the main thing is just, use your energy wisely and, enjoy the newfound vigor, but just kind of don't come across too aggressively to people.
Sure. Yeah, it could be a period in which you have more energy and can speak and act more directly than normal, especially compared to the previous month and a half.
Yeah.
But also sometimes that energy can bubble over and lead to aggressiveness or irritability, or impulsiveness that can sometimes get you in trouble, either mentally and verbally, or alternatively even physically, because sometimes a Mars transit through the first could indicate like an accident or an injury if it's hitting your chart in a particularly difficult way.
Yeah, exactly. So that'll be there until near the end of June.
Okay. So that is that transit, and weirdly there's a whole cluster of stuff happening around this time because Jupiter's stationing retrograde in Capricorn in the 11th house the next day on the 14th of May, and the same day that Mars ingresses on the 13th, Venus actually stations retrograde in Gemini in the 4th house of the home and the family and the living situation for those with Pisces rising.
Mm-hmm. So a Venus retrograde normally is about people coming back into your life that used to be around, and that can be, as a general signification, true for everyone. It's often associated with like people coming back into your life that you used to date or something like that, or old friends. And that still can be true here, but the more particular area of your life that it's transiting through and revisiting is your 4th house of home and family. So there may be a sense of, at this time, of you reviewing your living situation, whether you're happy with it or not, thinking about moving, but maybe not moving yet. It could also be a time when someone you used to live with comes back around or comes back into contact with you. That's not necessarily to say someone actually moves back in with you, although that could happen. But it's more to say that there's just some sort of review process around for you at this time with regard to things involving your living situation, maybe home, as well as anything with your parents in particular or family more generally.
Yeah, one thing I could see somebody doing at the Venus retrograde through the 4th house is like redesigning their home and just like their decor or general arrangement of their house in order to create a more harmonious like living situation.
That's true. Although that does I agree with that. And that also does bring up the thing that we talked about with Venus retrogrades through the first, which is, do you actually act on that redesign at this point? Or do you wait until Venus goes direct? Because sometimes when you're in the review process, your aesthetic choices are different than they would be normally.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fine to initiate that process, but it may not come to completion, and you may go through several different stages before you reach a final thing that you're happy with more towards the very end of the retrograde.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah. So just know that it's a review process and you're not quite done with that until it goes direct.
Right. All right. So Jupiter stations retrograde here, which is an intensification of some of the 11th house growth and expansion significations with respect to friends and groups on the 14th. And then that's pretty much it for May. So,
yeah, go ahead.
So that takes us into June.
Yeah, so June starts off with the first Sagittarius eclipse, which is going to be in your 10th house of career and public reputation. So that's on June 5th. And up to this point, we've had the eclipses in the Cancer-Capricorn axis, which is your 5th house and 11th house. But at the end of the year, they're going to be fully in Gemini and Sagittarius, which is your home and living situation and family and your career or your supervisors, if you have any. And so this first one in Sagittarius kicks that off, even though there's not a full set. And so this is something about bringing to a mini culmination, because it is a lunar eclipse, into your 10th house of something that you've either been working on or an opportunity that arises with regard to career. But basically, eclipses bring beginnings and endings, and those can be mini chapters, not necessarily like a wholesale ending of your entire career, although that could mean for some people switching careers. It could also mean something changing with regard to your boss, if you have one. I've seen that with eclipses in the 10th house, sort of your supervisor changing, getting a new supervisor, things like that. But anyway, this is going to be an area of potential change for you over the next year or so, because the eclipses in Gemini and Sagittarius will continue into 2021, and this is just the first one of the set.
Yeah, so this is starting to shine a spotlight on your 10th house of career and questions about who you are and where you're going with your life and what is your reputation and what do you want it to be. and you may see some things start to reach a culmination point or start to reach a point where they start wrapping up over the next 6 months so that you're ready to begin a new phase in terms of your career and life direction later this year around November and December. But this will be the initial starting point or the initial phase of that'll sort of open that chapter of your life with this eclipse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know I've talked with some clients who are Pisces rising, who are thinking about a career change or looking for a new job or something. And this will start to become times when change will be more likely as an opportunity.
Right. All right. So that's going to take us into the later part of June, where there's a couple of potentially related things that are happening in the same sector of the chart. One of them is Mercury stations retrograde for the second time this year, this time in the sign of Cancer, in the 5th house for those with Pisces rising. And then just 2 days later, we get a solar eclipse, and it's the last or the final solar eclipse in Cancer, also in the 5th house for those with Pisces rising.
Yeah, so while Mercury retrogrades usually aren't big deals in terms of transits, this one is tied into something that's a bit bigger, that eclipse there. So with the Mercury retrograde happening in your 5th house of children, sexuality, creative pursuits, and things you do for enjoyment, there may be some sort of review that's happening for you with regard to at least one, if not more, of those topics. And then with the eclipse happening there, that just intensifies that further. So basically, there's something happening during this part of the year, during the summer, with regard to children. If you have any children, perhaps for some people with the Mercury retrograde there in particular, it's reviewing your ideas about whether you want to have children or not in your life in the future. I could see that being true for some people.
Or like miscommunication surrounding children.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
That's funny with the solar eclipse there in the 6th house, or 5th house, it's also going to lay a new foundation and start something new, the seeds of which could grow subtly over the course of the next 6 months. So maybe one good piece of advice is to make sure you have clear communication, no misunderstandings with your partners about like birth control, for example.
No, for sure.
Having like a miscommunication involving that starts some new major phase in your life in that area.
Yes, in theory, I could definitely see that combination.
Okay.
Yeah, so be careful about that and be as clear as possible. I think that is happening near a Neptune station, is it not, on the calendar there?
Let me pull up the calendar.
Yeah. Because I think, and I'm only mentioning this with a few signs when it's more focal, but since it's happening in your 1st house, I think that's more important because it's the 1st house of self. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting actually with some of these transits, they tie in more easily than others. And with all of this activity with the Mercury retrograde and the solar eclipse in your 5th house, but then that happening so close to the Venus stationing direct and Neptune stationing retrograde in your 1st house, the Neptune station, in addition to the Mercury retrograde, I would say be especially clear as much as you can be about where you're coming from, particularly with regard to those 5th house topics like children, because you could be inadvertently, again, as I said earlier, with any Neptune activity in the 1st, you could be inadvertently less clear than you think you are being. And then with the Venus stationing direct, yeah, I could just see that tying in a lot for some people, even though the Venus station is more in your 4th house of home and family, just the general signification of it, plus the 5th house activity. I could see that being something important with regard to dating for some people, dating, sexuality, potentially children.
Sure. So Venus stations direct on the 25th of June. And then just 2 days later, we get our last major transit of the month, which is that Mars ingresses into Aries and into the 2nd house of finances for those with Pisces rising.
Yeah, and so Mars ingressing into Aries is more important than usual this year because while Mars transits are usually just a 6-week transit, Mars is going to retrograde in Aries this year in the fall, which means that through all of its direct and then retrograde and then direct again movements, it's going to spend 6 months in Aries instead of 6 weeks, which is quite a bit of difference. The entirety of the 2nd half of 2020, Mars will be transiting your 2nd house of income and finances and possessions. And so this is an important one to watch for you as it enters at the end of June, even though the main piece that we're really looking at isn't going to happen until September, the retrograde station itself. So with Mars transiting your 2nd house, this can bring more effort and attention and energy towards your making a living, towards what you're doing with your money. And depending on your specifics of your chart, that can either be simply that you're just putting more energy towards that area of your life for a while, or it can be more conflict or strife or loss with regard to money or possessions. Sometimes if you're born during the day, that's going to be more likely in terms of Mars being the more stressful transit through there, where you might have financial problems during some piece of the second half of 2020. It's more likely to crop up during the retrograde itself, but this sets some of the themes for what's going on. If it's going to be more constructive for you, if you have a night chart, it's usually just more that you're putting more energy towards making money for some reason during this time.
Right. So best case scenario, greater focus and intention for the next 6 months on the area of finances and like what it takes to make money, and putting energy or even pushing yourself harder than at other times in your life to do that for some reason. Maybe something comes up that causes that as a necessity that you have to do during this time, especially once it gets intensified later in September when Mars stations retrograde. So that's like the best case scenario. Worst case scenario is some sort of strife or conflict in the area of finances that sort of gets going or has its initial phase when Mars goes into Aries at the end of June, but really peaks once it stations retrograde in September.
Definitely. And while most people don't want to hear, news like that, one of the things that's really useful to know about that ahead of time is, maybe try to set aside more money than usual in terms of savings if you know that this kind of transit is going to be coming up for you, because you don't know how it will go yet. And so you can try to be like perhaps more conservative than you usually are with your spending in preparation for that transit.
Right. All right. So that begins at the end of June, but then it lasts for most of the rest of the year with an intensification in September. So we'll actually come back to that transit later.
Yeah.
But this will take us into the second half of the year. I just wanted to pause for a second and say thanks everybody for joining us for the live stream. There's a bunch of viewers, and I'm enjoying a lot of your comments that are coming in. Please be sure to like this video if you're enjoying it, just to help other people to find it. And let's transition into talking about the astrology for the second half of the year.
Okay. So July starts off with Saturn going back into Capricorn, into your 11th house of friends and groups. And pretty soon after that, there is also the last eclipse in Capricorn in that same area of your life. So this is going to be a time when, on the one hand, you kind of had an alleviation of work on that area of your life for a few months when Saturn went into Aquarius, into your 12th house. And now it's kind of back in. So for some people, it might be like, oh, I thought I dealt with this area already. And, now I have to focus on it again. But this is only going to be for 5 more months. And then you're done with the 3-year transit. So this is the last stretch during the second half of 2020. Saturn goes back into Capricorn from July until mid-December. And so you're going to be putting more work and effort into your friends and groups area again. Any work you do with groups of any sort, or work on a friendship that you have, or work restructuring who you are friends with or who you hang out with. All of that could come up at this time with both the Saturn ingress again and the last eclipse there.
Yeah, so there's something that maybe not finished about the area of friends and groups that you've been working on for about 2.5 years at this point, but Saturn is coming back in order to either make the final push to make sure that you've finished up and sort of swept up the pieces in that area of your life that you've been working on restructuring for the past couple of years, or there may be some specific thing that you have to go back to make sure that you got the lesson of whatever the point of that transit was about. So at the same time, there's a solar eclipse that occurs a few days later, also in Capricorn, a lunar eclipse, which sort of indicates additionally, or sort of reiterates this idea of a period of a culmination of events in the area of friends and groups, and just putting a greater spotlight on that area so that something that you started 6 months earlier in the beginning of or end of December will sort of come to completion and start to bear fruit or show the results of your efforts, even if they started off in a way that was very slow, or in a way that didn't seem important at first. Now suddenly your efforts in the area of friends and groups start to really matter and start to become more clear.
Definitely. And for some of you, a lot of the work will have been done already, since the Saturn piece is only going to go back to about 25 degrees of Capricorn, I believe, before it stations direct again. So unless you have important placements towards the end of the cardinal signs, so the last about 5 degrees of Capricorn or Aries, Libra, Cancer, then you might have more of the focal point of actual events coming up with regard to friends and groups at this time. And you could still with the eclipse there, but to some extent, for a lot of people with Pisces rising, this won't be a new story, and you will have already done a lot of things with this area already.
Right. All right. So the only other major thing that happens in July is that Mercury stations direct in Cancer. So it sort of finishes up that 3-week retrograde cycle that we were talking about earlier. And then we move into the astrology of August.
Mm-hmm. So August has a lot lit up on this calendar, but really the main thing, a lot of those are quick interplanet transits. The main thing that's happening to note right now for the year ahead is Uranus stationing retrograde on August 15th. In Taurus in your 3rd house of siblings, short distance travel, and communications. And so what we were talking about earlier in January with that first station comes back again. And so there's another intensification for the second time this year on unpredictability, unexpected things coming up in any of these areas of your life. And that's going to be true more so if you do have placements close to 10 or 11 degrees of Taurus, because that is where Uranus is stationing here at this time, and also to some extent 10 or 11 degrees of any of the other fixed signs, so Aquarius, Scorpio, or Leo.
Yeah, so this is the first time that Uranus has gotten this far into Taurus. So especially for those with placements at 10 degrees of Taurus or the other fixed signs, some of those feelings of instability or disruptions or unexpected developments are really going to start to become more prominent in your life, even if they were slowly building up to this point. This is the point where they might peak in terms of intensity during the course of this transit.
Mm-hmm.
So major changes in overhauls and communication, major changes in terms of your siblings' lives or in terms of your relationship with your siblings, changes potentially to your neighbors or your neighborhood in general in some way.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, we have like a local business that we know the birth chart for, and they were having some major outer planet transits over the course of the past few years in their 3rd house, and literally we saw the entire neighborhood around the business like change during the course of that time.
Yeah.
Which is pretty wild to watch how that happens in the chart of like a business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It was pretty striking, really. So it can be something like that, like your neighborhood goes through changes, innovations of some sort come in that weren't there already, and things like that.
Right. So that's the main transit happening in August, is that Uranus station right in the middle of the month.
Mm-hmm.
And then that takes us through into September.
Yeah, so September is actually the main event in terms of the Mars retrograde. Mars does station retrograde on September 9th, and it's going to be retrograde until mid-November. So a couple months or a little more. And so this is the point in time when all the things we were mentioning earlier with regard to energy output put towards income or possessions, or potentially conflict or tensions around that area of your life will come to a head. And if something is cropping up that causes you to review what you were doing up to this point, then this is around when that will happen. And that is because, Mars gets all the way to 28 degrees of Aries before it retrogrades. And so you will have the feeling, we'll all have the feeling at that point, I think, that we were mostly done with that area and that we did what we were supposed to do with regard to, for you, money, your source of income or your spending or your possessions. But then all of a sudden there's something that makes us do a detour or a U-turn and go back over what we were just working on before that with regard to the financial area of our life, and try to figure out what you need to do to go forward again.
Right. One of the things that's interesting about when Mars stations in September, when it stations retrograde, it's at 28 degrees of Aries, and it's pretty closely squaring Saturn at 25 Capricorn during that time. So there could be some sort of connection here about tensions between the person's personal finances and their friends, or financial matters and their relationship with like groups or organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be an area to watch out for as a potential source of problems during that time, just because the retrograde itself is kind of a tense period that really gets going at this stage.
Yeah, definitely. And if there's any conflict around money, and friends, that could definitely crop up at this time. I was thinking when I was mentioning earlier about the Jupiter-Pluto transit through your 11th, if you are one of those Pisces rising people that is working on a project with friends, or even, doing something professionally with friends, you want to be especially careful around this time with regard to conflict around the financial pieces of it.
Sure. The good news, though, is that just a few days after Mars stations retrograde, Jupiter stations direct in the 11th house of Friends in Capricorn, which should indicate some sort of positive forward movement or expansion in terms of friends and groups. And then later in the month, Saturn makes its final direct station towards the end of Capricorn, and then it's going to start moving forward on its way to departing that house and finishing up its 3-year transit through that sign.
Yeah, so this is the last hurrah for all of your 11th house efforts, and with friends and groups. And so with both Jupiter and Saturn direct after this point, you can kind of do, I was going to say, smooth sailing. I mean, it depends on if you have any placements in the rest of the degrees of Capricorn in the last 5 degrees, but to some extent, relatively speaking, it's smoother sailing forward and finishing up whatever you're working on in that area.
Right. So those are the last major things for September. And some of those transits, even though intensified at this point when they station, are still in effect going into the following month. This takes us into October, where really the main thing that happens is that Mercury stations retrograde in Scorpio on the 13th of the month.
So this is the last Mercury retrograde of 2020. It will station retrograde in Scorpio, which for you with Pisces rising is going to be the 9th house, which has to do with higher education, long distance travel, things that involve cultures that are different from yours, even if you are staying at home, religion, philosophy, worldview types of things. And so with Mercury stationing retrograde there's some sort of review for you going on for a few weeks. With regard to at least one of those topics. So you're rethinking perhaps your desire to do some sort of educational pursuit, or you are rethinking a travel plan, or you maybe need to change a travel plan that you've already set up. Other things like that, reviewing your belief systems.
Yeah, I mean, it could indicate a Mercury retrograde in the 9th house could indicate taking a sudden trip. Especially because Mercury stations retrograde at 11 degrees of Scorpio opposite to Uranus at 9 degrees of Taurus. So there could be some sort of unexpected traveling that has to take place at this time. And there may be some snafus or miscommunications or difficulties that come up during the course of that. But sometimes that's necessary to do nonetheless, and you can't necessarily always avoid it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's true. And especially so since the 3rd house where Uranus is transiting and the opposition will happen to travel is also one of those topics there.
Right. So Mercury, though, doesn't stay in that sign, but instead towards the end of the month on the 27th, it actually retrogrades back into Libra, moving back into the 8th house of shared resources for those with Pisces rising.
So there may be something that you also need to review at this time as it dips back into your 8th house of shared resources in terms of your financial life. And that's not just true because of the Mars transit in the 2nd, but then the 8th house is the other financial house that has to do with joint finances. So anything you own or any financial life you have with a personal partner or a business partner. It can also be the other financial topics that aren't income, such as taxes, loans, debts, inheritance, those sorts of things. And so Mercury retrograding just a little bit back into that house for you and then stationing direct there could have you reviewing any of those topics as well at this time.
Yeah. So there could be a connection between the 9th house of travel and like the 8th house of maybe having to borrow money from somebody due to a trip or due to an unexpected expense that comes up within the context of a trip, or education, which is a 9th house thing, and something that came up in the context of education requiring you to borrow money, which would be an 8th house thing. There may be some connection with the fact that, or overlapping of 9th house and 8th house topics because the Mercury retrograde goes across the boundaries of those two signs.
Yeah.
So that's taking us into the month of November, where very early in the month on the 3rd of November, Mercury stations direct and starts moving forward and completes its 3-week retrograde period. And then the other major thing that happens this month is Mars finally completes its retrograde period and stations direct around 15 degrees of Aries.
So this is the turning point, the other major turning point besides the station retrograde in September that everyone I think will really be looking forward to, because whatever you needed to review or go back over or redo in your financial life, you're finally going to be able to turn it around and start moving forward again with that. And Mars does take a bit in terms of speeding back up to its regular speed and motion. And so when it does station direct here in the middle of November, it won't be that you can implement everything immediately to smooth everything out, whatever, cropped up in your financial life here, but you will at least feel like you have a plan, or you will start to have a plan to move things forward again and, what's the word? Just iron out the wrinkles of whatever came up during this Mars retrograde in your financial house.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of forward movement again at this time. And you had been sort of like treading water for several weeks when it comes to financial matters, or having to put and expend a lot of energy on that area of your life for some reason. But now all of a sudden there's an end in sight to this period, and a realization that you're going to turn a corner and start to come out of it before too long, which should be probably a happy sight to see by that time.
Yeah, definitely. I think mostly it's really good. I think the only cautionary note would be, again, with any Mars intensification, just, be aware of not provoking too much conflict with regard to finances at this time. I mean, Mars is in Aries. That's a very assertive sign. So to some extent, some of you may need to be assertive about financial matters at this time, but you just want to be a little bit cautionary as far as not going overboard. It's not so much that it's in your first house of self at this point. It's just around financial matters primarily.
Right, definitely. All right. So then later in November, we get back into eclipse season, and it starts with a lunar eclipse, which happens in Gemini in the 4th house of the home and the family and the living situation on the 30th of the month.
So now we're fully into the Gemini-Sagittarius axis for the eclipses. And so we just had the one in Sagittarius in the summer, but now we have Gemini at the end of November, and then 2 weeks later in mid-December, we'll have the Sagittarius one. So they come in pairs like that. And so at the end of November, we will have that lunar eclipse to your 4th house of home and family. And this is an area that you would have been focusing on a little bit earlier in the year, in the summer, in May and June in particular, because of the Venus retrograde happening there. So whatever was coming up at this time, even though that's different than an eclipse, the eclipse brings beginnings and endings. There could be something around the same topics for you coming up near the end of the year. So basically, new decisions around where you're living, maybe new things happening in your parents' life or in your relationship with your parents, or new things happening with regard to your private life. And it's not completely new because this is a lunar eclipse, so it's kind of a mini culmination. But the series in general brings new beginnings and endings in that area.
Yeah, there's something that you probably initiated 6 months earlier over the summer that in the area of your living situation or your parents or your private life that starts to become more clear and starts to manifest as a more significant part of your life at this point, even if it didn't seem like it was going to be a major change at the time. So that starts happening there. But then also with these two eclipses and this shift towards the 4th house, 10th house axis, in the middle of December on the 14th, with that solar eclipse in the sign of Sagittarius in your 10th house, there is a major new beginning when it comes to your career and your overall life direction. And there's something that gets initiated at this point where you're laying the seeds or the foundations of a new direction in your life with respect to career that will grow and develop until it eventually matures about 6 months later. About halfway into 2021.
Definitely. So this is a time, as I was mentioning earlier, that with the Sagittarius eclipses in your 10th house of career, there can be more openings if you were looking for a new job or looking to switch fields that you're working in. Eclipses are a time when greater change is possible in whatever area they're touching in your life. So any of you who were, looking for new work or thinking about switching companies, you can look at that around this time, and there'll be more openings for that, I think. And that also can be true, like I said earlier, for things involving your boss. So some people, for instance, maybe your supervisor leaves the company, and so then you are starting to report to a new boss, and that's a whole new experience. So the 10th house can govern both of those things. It can also be recognition, professional recognition. Sometimes not necessarily things like switching jobs, but you reach some sort of mini pinnacle with regard to work that you've been working on in whatever professional field you're in.
Yeah, there's somebody in the chat named Stargirl who says that she's saving money hopefully to buy a house by the end of the year,
Nice.
which would be a really great sort of textbook manifestation of that eclipse taking place in the fourth house.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah. All right. So this is taking us into December and into the final major transits of the year, and perhaps the most momentous or major transits of 2020, which is Saturn finally completes its 3-year transit through Capricorn and through your 11th house of friendship, and it ingresses into Aquarius for the final time on the 17th of December. Then 2 days later, Jupiter also moves into Aquarius, and the two form a conjunction in the sky on the 21st of December.
Mm-hmm. So Saturn is coming back to where it did its little few-month preview in the spring, which was late March through July 1st. And so this is now, for the next about 2.5 years, Saturn will be applying its scrutiny, sort of, impulse for hard work and responsibility and so forth to your 12th house of hidden matters, your own subconscious, and things of that nature, things that you do in private. And Jupiter also will be transiting there. So as we were mentioning earlier, that's a way better combination at the end of the year starting to form, instead of just Mars and Saturn, which are more strife. Jupiter is more opportunity. So Jupiter transiting through your 12th, let's see, experiences of that. I mean, oftentimes it's more of a hidden influence. You don't actually see it, or other people don't see it outwardly in your life. It's more about beneficial things coming from retreat, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Or growth through seclusion could be one.
Yeah.
Like going off to like an ashram and like meditating, or like going off to a library or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So the 12th house has to do with seclusion of various sorts. And so with Jupiter transiting through there for the next year, that would say you will get benefits in your life through retreat of whatever sort, through taking more time, more alone time for yourself, which, for a lot of people feels hard to do. But at this point in the year, and then going for about a year forward, this will be something that if you do take more time for yourself, you will probably have more inner growth and better, benefits for your overall life. And that also will help out the beginning of your Saturn transit, or relatively speaking, the beginning of your Saturn transit, because this is when it's going to be in Aquarius for a while now. And so for the first year of that, you're getting Jupiter and Saturn there, and not just Saturn alone. Saturn alone is more just hard work or responsibility, or, taking care of this area in a more way that you kind of have to. But Jupiter there joining it for the first year of that transit is bringing more expansion, even though you also have those other things going.
Yeah, definitely. It can also be a good time to restructure and deal with or address the sort of like internal or mental health area of one's life during a heavy 12th house transit, and going through a period of introspection and like internal house cleaning, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. And Jupiter will help you do that rather than it just feeling more like something you have to do.
Sure, definitely. All right. Well, this is taking us to the very end of the transits, at the very end of 2020, and we're actually getting ahead of ourselves because we're starting to talk about transits that are going into 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So we may have to call it a night for this forecast, and maybe come back again next year for the forecast for 2021 and save the rest for then.
Sounds good.
Okay. Cool. Well, thanks everybody for joining us tonight, especially in the chat. Those who joined us live for the live stream, I appreciated it and enjoyed some of your comments. Please be sure to like this video, to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and if you're watching the recording, please post a comment below just explaining how some of these transits are working for you so far in your life, like the 8th house Saturn transits over the past couple of years, or how you anticipate some of the transits working coming up in 2020 that we've just been describing.
Mm-hmm.
Just a few things to mention before we wrap up for the night. Most of the artwork in this episode comes from a set of posters that we released as a set this year, which display the planetary transits for the entirety of 2020. And it tells you at a glance exactly when certain planets change signs, when they station retrograde or direct, when the lunations, like the new moon and full moon and eclipses, take place, and so on and so forth. So it's really helpful tools for tracking some of the astrology of 2020. And you can find out more information about that at the astrologypodcast.com/2020 posters. Leisa and I also released a couple of weeks ago our annual 2020 auspicious elections full year ahead electional report, where we went through each of the next 12 months and we picked out a specific date, so one day for each of the next 12 months, that had the best astrological or planetary alignments for starting new ventures and undertakings, like starting a new business or getting married or going on a major journey or other things like that. And it was pretty fun to record that because that was like a 2-hour sort of presentation like this.
Yeah, so if you're wanting to plan further ahead in the year for something that you plan to do months ahead of time, this is a great tool for that. We've already looked through the entire year and found the best options for you for it to go well.
Right. So you can find out more information about that at chrisbrennanastrologer.com/2020elections. And then finally, we also have to do a shout out to all of our patrons who support the production of each episode of the Astrology Podcast through our page on Patreon. In particular, shout out to patrons Christine Stone, Nate Craddock, and Tanner Robinson, as well as the AstroGold Astrology app available at astrogold.io, the Portland School of Astrology at portlandastrology.org, and the Honeycomb Collective Personal Astrological Almanacs available at honeycomb.co. There's 2 major astrology conferences happening this year. One of them is the International Society for Astrological Research is hosting a conference in Denver, Colorado, September 10th through the 14th of 2020. More information about that at esar2020.org. And then finally, there's also the Northwest Astrological Conference, which is happening in Seattle from May 21st through the 25th. And you can find out more information about that at norwac.net. To become a patron and get access to early access to new episodes and other bonus content, go to patreon.com/astrologypodcast. All right, that's it for this forecast. We did it. Congratulations to us. Thank you for carrying me through as I'm like losing my voice towards the end of this, the last 3 episodes, installments today.
Yeah, quite welcome.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for your patience this week. This took longer than I expected because initially I was thinking I was going to do maybe like 5 horoscopes a day. And then they turned out to be a little bit longer and more detailed than I anticipated. But I wanted to make sure each one got a proper treatment. So we did a full hour at least for each one.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So if you liked this, then let us know in the comments. Thanks everybody who joined us in the live stream. We appreciate you. And good luck in 2020 and we'll see you again next year.
Have a great year.